Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I associate my remarks with the ranking member. Mr. Massie, I've got a lot of problems with this bill, as I know you do too. Let's just focus on the curtailing of rights for individuals 18 to 21. Could you go into more detail of how this will actually impact those individuals' Second Amendment rights?
Well, it's going to, I think it's constitutionally problematic to treat people 18 to 21 differently for a fundamental right like the Second Amendment, to treat them differently than you would treat anybody else. There's no provision in the Constitution that allows that. It's going to be effectively a delay on their purchase that's different than others. And I wish this included a study on the impact of this by race and income level, because I'm worried that when you apply extra scrutiny to 18 to 21-year-olds, you're also going to get more false denials. And we've seen that with the NICS background check, that's already happening. And there's a disparate effect by race. And I think there are even some progressives in this body who are worried about that provision and the heightened scrutiny on 18 to 21-year-olds.
Yeah, I think there's already precedent out there from the Ninth Circuit, which is clearly not a circuit known for conservative opinions. Jones v. Banta saying that it's actually unconstitutional to do this. Do you want to expand upon that?
No, I would just echo that. That is a recent decision, and I'm glad they came to that. Some people are saying it's because they luck of the draw. There was a random panel of judges, and they got lucky, and they upheld the Constitution that day. But as we've seen from the Supreme Court's recent ruling yesterday, I think when that decision that you just mentioned, that you can't deprive rights, this basic fundamental right that's enshrined in the Constitution, I think in light of yesterday's ruling at the Supreme Court and in light of the ruling in the Ninth Circuit that you mentioned, that what we have here in front of us today is an unconstitutional bill, at least that provision of it, that applies to 18 to 20-year-olds.
Thanks, Mr. Massie. And I want to focus on the engaged in business language, which, as you alluded to in your opening statement, is really a backdoor for universal background checks. Would you like to just talk about the practical implications of the engaged in business language?
You know, this is something that's always troubled me, the gray area and whether you need to have a federal firearms license or not. And I think there's something bipartisan we could do on this. Why do we want so much gray area here? And I worry, and I know people personally, before I came to Congress, who were prosecuted for selling firearms without a license and served time in prison, but they were selling from a personal collection. And that's, you know, and it's always debatable what's a personal collection, what's not. There's no numeric number on it. It's not, we don't define whether you need an FFL or not here in any way that's objective. It's all subjective, and they've made it even more subjective here, and I'm worried that by making the line less bright, by graying the line between who's selling from a personal collection and who's in the business of doing this as a vocation, we're going to end up with more people prosecuted who are just merely trying to transfer a firearm from a legal law-abiding citizen to another legal law-abiding citizen.
And you would agree that the push to do this would ultimately lead to a national gun registry, because even Eric Holder said you can't have universal background checks without a national registry. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, that is what this is. This is a backdoor universal background check, which is basically a registry. As we've seen at the ATF, they've collected hundreds of millions of gun records and put them in a searchable database, which is something they are specifically precluded from doing by federal law, yet we see that they're keeping this database. And what this provision will do is people will never know after this provision passes whether they can be prosecuted for transferring a firearm if they don't go to a dealer to do it. And so every time you go to a dealer, you create this paper trail, which, by the way, if it were useful, you know, in solving crime, there might be a reason to have it, but it's been proven, again, not to be useful. And this is going to cause, this is, I think, the precursor to creating a universal background check system for the purposes of a registry.
Thanks, Mr. Massey. My last line of question regards ex parte hearings. I'm one of the few people in Congress, I actually might be the only one in this chamber that's actually presided over an ex parte hearing when I was a magisterial district judge. I can tell you it is difficult when you're only hearing one side of the story. More often than not, I'd be willing to guess it was over 95% of the time the petitioner wins because it's his or her case that you're hearing. You're hearing no facts from the other side. I'm incredibly worried about this with the red flag hearings. Would you like to talk about how this could curtail somebody's due process rights?
Absolutely, and I'd like to add to what you're saying, something based on discussion I had with a senator last night. Again, we're trying to collect information about this bill. It's being rushed through, so I thought I'd talk to a senator. And this senator pointed out that if a judge goes through this red flag hearing and deems somebody unfit, in a snap judgment, it may be another judge who has to review that. And there's going to be an inherent bias in that second judge now, not to overturn the first judge, because the implications of making a mistake are so great that that judge, his career would be ended. And so the inclination of the second judge, who's going to be reviewing the snap judgment of the first one, is to, uphold it. And so there's a low level of proof that's required in that snap judgment because it's supposed to be for only a few days. But that hearing biases the second judge. And I think that's going to create a big problem. And we've seen that in states. Like there's thousands of people who are on these lists now who can't buy a gun, who are obviously not a danger to themselves or others.
Thanks, Mr. Massey. We could talk about the states that actually do have red flag laws, in fact, that there's no differential in crime. In fact, there's some evidence that in those places, for example, New York, you actually have higher levels of crime. But we'll leave that to another day for the sake of time. So thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.